So listen, every booktuber out there right now is doing their fall recommendation list. And I have nothing more original to contribute to that conversation. But what I am going to offer are just a few fun books to read. They're not fall, they're not winter, they're just fun for any time of the year. Let's get into it. Hi, it's Hope. Welcome to Hopefully Here, and let's talk books, shall we? Okay, this was going to be a list of 10, but I think I've got more. So we're going to try to organize them in some sort of cohesive fashion and go from there. Let's start with fun political books. And I suppose before I even really get into things, I should preface this by saying fun does not necessarily mean haha funny. They aren't devoid of deeper meaning and deeper topic. They do have, generally most of them have some sort of underlying meaning. It doesn't mean that they're fluffy books by any means. They were just books that I really enjoyed reading and think that a lot of people could sit down and consume and just have a good time with it and still get something out of it. So I really want to put that out there. These are not fluffy books by any means. They're fun books. Okay, so let's, like I said, I'm going to start with the political books. First we have Jamila Green Ruins Everything by Zarqa Nawaz. And this is a satire about American foreign policy, essentially. It's a woman who kind of tries to make a deal with God and because she wants her book to be a bestseller. And she ends up talking to this imam that her daughter and her husband have a really good relationship, but what is her name? Jamila, duh. But Jamila doesn't really have much of a religious relationship at this point, and things go off the rails. It's definitely a look at policy in the Middle East and Americans and identity, and it was very amusing. This wasn't a 5-star read for me, but I have seen people put it as a 5-star, and I had a really good time, and I think that a lot of people would have a good time reading this book. Additionally, if you are into Canadian politics, and I do think this very specifically goes to people who have some sort of interest in Canadian politics, I would not recommend this book broadly for everybody, but I think the people that find the topic interesting would have a good time with that, and that is Terry Fallis's Best Laid Plans. Is that what it's called? Where is it? I believe it's called Best Laid Plans. Anyways, the title's going to be here. And this follows a man who's in politics and is hoping to get out of it. And in order to do so, he bribes somebody to put their names up as the Liberal candidate in a riding that has just historically been PC. And as you can imagine, things don't really go to plan for him either, and it is a funny, satirical look at the Canadian political landscape. I enjoyed this one. It is a trilogy. I'm not super interested in the second and third books, but I don't think you need to be. I think you can read the first book on its own and be completely content with it. You've got kind of the jaded older man. There's a hovercraft. It's got some really interesting components, pretty stereotypical Canadian, but definitely a good time if you are looking for kind of a political satire with the Canadian landscape. It's a good one. We're going to move on to nonfiction, and in this case, I have 3 nonfiction books. The first is, it's called Weird Things People Say at Bookstores by Jen Campbell, and it's just a series of vignettes of weird requests or weird things people said to her, along with, there must have been submissions by other booksellers, what they have heard on the floor while selling books. And I think for book readers, you would really get a kick out of this one. I also want to recommend, again, this is more of a specialized or more of a specific recommendation, and that's for the sports lovers in your lives. Anchor Boy by Jay Onrait is hysterical. This is one that will actually get you laughing. I read this when I worked at Kohl's up in Victoria, and it had me laughing out loud at inappropriate moments, and I absolutely love this book. I didn't love his second book, but the first one, Anchor Boy, So good. And if you have a sports lover in your life, I can't even tell you how many copies of this I recommended because I was there over a Christmas period. I think I gave this as a recommendation to every other person who came in the store. This book is so good. And then finally, in the nonfiction, but also graphic novel, Hyperbole and a Half by Ali Brosh. This is a book that deals with a pretty heavy topic of mental health, but she presents it and she tells her story in a really funny way with these like ridiculous cartoons. And she talks about her mental health and dogs, and I don't necessarily think you're gonna laugh out loud at all the components of this, but I think you will have a good time reading, and so that's why I think this is a fun book to pick up. I have one classic on this book, and that is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you haven't read it, you're in for a good time. The world comes to an end. A man gets put up into space with his friend who turns out to be some sort of alien, and they go on an adventure. There are words in it that I can't remember and people that I don't remember, but I do know that it is a good time, and for a classic, I think that is quite the achievement, because so many classics, I love classics, but a lot of them are dry or melancholy or sad, and this one was just a good time, and there's a reason people absolutely love it. Thrillers. Let's talk thrillers. We have The Hunting Wives by May Cobb. We're going to talk about this as being murdering mean girls, but for adults. These are grown women, they have children, but if Mean Girls went murder in 20 years in the future, essentially, that is this book, and it gets a little bonkers. The ending is a little crazy. You're following 4 women, but particularly you're focusing on Sophie and Margot. I would say they're kind of the main characters, Sophie more so than Margot, and Margot is kind of the ringleader of this quartet of women, and Sophie really wants to be part of the cool kids group, and it comes with some strings, so that is this book here. We also have one really popular thriller, which is In My Hand I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. It's a really good time. I thoroughly enjoyed that book. Constant page turner. It's a group of people coming together for an anniversary. One of their friends had been murdered in university, and it turns out somebody thinks that people are lying about what happened, and they want to get to the bottom of it. And it gets crazy, but really good. And then finally, in the thrillers, we have Look Closer by David Ellis. This is a pretty thick thriller, and I wasn't sure going into it how I would feel, but I quite enjoyed this one. You're following Vicky and Simon, and when you think you know what's going on, something changes and you realize that you've been missing a pretty critical piece of information. So we're following this storyline as Simon has an affair and his mistress ends up dead. But there is a lot more going on. It gets really convoluted and crazy, but I think that the twists are done very, very well. So I would definitely recommend that for a good thriller, which I suppose also appropriate for the autumnal vibes. Thrillers seem to be the fall book of choice, and this is one. Next, go with the one science fiction book, Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Look, if you want a good time with the science fiction, I honestly think this is the best recommendation for this category. I really enjoyed this book. A lot of people, well, I have seen most people enjoy it, but I think I've also heard people not loving it as much, but most of the people that I know of really enjoyed this book. It gets a little sciencey, but the overall premise about this man who wakes up in a spaceship, doesn't know why he's there, everybody else is dead. He kind of gets his memory back over time, but he remembers the math of things and the science of things. And that is how he kind of starts to figure out what he's doing on this spaceship and what his mission is and goal is. And then things start to go wrong, but you're introduced to just different parts of the environment that make this really compelling and fun. And I had a great time reading this book. It did not feel as long as it is. If you're looking for a bit of a chunkier book, but one that should fly by, definitely worth picking up. If you're looking for a smaller book that is still a good time, French Exit by Patrick DeWitt. I love Patrick DeWitt's writing. I have enjoyed all of his books. I just finished reading The Librarianist by him, and I absolutely adored it. And this is about a mother and a son who have to kind of flee to Paris because they are broke, and their adventures, there's a lot of little funny side characters. It's really good, and he is Canadian. He's a Canadian author, so if you're looking for a new Canadian author to add to your repertoire, him. But if you're looking for kind of a lighthearted book, French Exit, although I would say most of his books are fairly fun reads, though they do, again, still have quite a bit of substance to them. And then we have Portrait of a Thief by Grace D. Lai. This is an art heist book, and the cast of characters is really entertaining. The plot is entertaining. It's about this group of people who come together to steal art, but they're stealing cultural art that they believe belongs in its home, in its native country. And there's quite a discussion about who owns art and what, museums and stuff should be doing with art that was captured through colonization or war, and when it should be given back to its homeland. And so that's a really fascinating discussion that I love, and I think it's done really well in this book, which is also just a romping good time. I think if I look at my list, oh no, I had two more. From the women's list, actually, both of these. One is The Bandit Queen by Parini Shroff, which follows, what's her name? Gita, who the community believes she murdered her husband. She didn't, but she really leans on that reputation to keep herself safe. And what's really fascinating about this book is it's dry and funny. Again, a lot of substance. It does touch on some fairly serious issues, but there's a lot of Instagram versus reality, just in that what she believes people think of her, but versus what people actually think of her, are very conflicting. And I found that to be really interesting, really fun read. A lot of people wanted this book to either be shortlisted or win the Women's Prize. So I think that says a lot to its popularity. And then another one on the list was Dog of the North by Elizabeth Mackenzie. This one wasn't as popular, but I really enjoyed this one. It's a woman whose life is kind of falling apart. She ends up going on these road trip with her grandfather in Australia, and also ends up kind of in possession of this van that's falling apart and this dog called Quickoats, and the story behind the dog's name is quite amusing. Again, just a book that I found really easy to read, lighthearted, and nothing was so dramatic and so awful that there were any points where it was kind of sad. It was just a fun, good book, and had a really great time with it. And I think that is the end of my list of things that I wanted to say. Yeah, so listen, I know, fall is upon us. We all want to get into the horror. Well, I don't read horror, but the thriller, cozy vibes. And so these might not be your stereotypical fall recommendations, but I still think they're just around for people to read and have a good time. And let me know if you've read any of these. What would you add to your fun reading list? And I will see you in the next video, which should be soon. Also, how much of the construction have you heard in the background? Because I think I might have chosen the wrong spot to record this video. I'll find out in the editing process. Bye.